The bystander effect shows that help decreases when there are more people witnessing it. The more people are present during an emergency, the less likely individuals are to help. This phenomenon, known as the bystander effect, occurs due to a diffusion of responsibility, where each person assumes someone else will take action. You're on the couch with Dr. Ty. Welcome to another edition of On the Couch with Dr. Ty. I'm Dr. Ty. What is learning? Learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior or knowledge that results from experience. In psychology, learning explains how we adapt to our environment, form habits, acquire skill sets, and build understanding of things over time. Behavioral perspective of learning focuses on observable behavior rather than mental processes. The key idea behind behavioral perspectives is shaped by stimuli, responses, as well as consequences. Some of the key theorists included Ivan Pavlov, who brought us classical conditioning, B.F. Skinner, who brought us operant conditioning, and John B. Watson. It kind of looked like a student studies really hard after receiving some positive reinforcement or praise from their teacher. From a cognitive perspective, or through the cognitive lens, learning involves mental processes such as thinking, memory, and problem solving. Learners are active participants. Key theorists included Albert Bandura, who brought us the observational learning tools, Jean Piaget, who coined cognitive development, and Edward Tolman, who brought us cognitive mapping. A great example here would be a person learns to navigate a city by mentally mapping it out before heading on their way. Social learning perspectives tried to bring people to learn through observing and imitating others. It emphasized modeling, motivation, and self-efficacy. You might have remembered Albert Bandura's Bobo doll experiment. This experiment demonstrated how children imitated aggressive behavior, even when parents didn't think that their child had aggression in them. The humanistic lens, or humanistic perspective, taught us that learning is actually driven by internal or personal growth, maybe some self-motivation, and the search for us to find meaning in ourselves. Abraham Maslow, who brought us the hierarchy of needs, and Carl Rogers, who focused on student-centered learning, brought home the emphasis of holistic development. Constructivists said that learners actively constructed knowledge through experiences. Key theorists in this particular perspective were Lev Vygotsky, which brought us the ZPD, or zone of proximal development, when we learn to tie our shoes because our mom taught us bunny ear over bunny ear. And Jerome Bruner, who coined discovery learning. A good way to bring this one home from a constructive perspective would be, let's say, students learn science by experimenting rather than actually taking things to memory. So when we make application of learning theories in psychology, learning theories apply to education, therapy, workplace training, meetings, Zooms, teams, and everyday life. They inform effective teaching, behavioral modifications, as well as motivational strategies. There are also a number of different factors that also influence learning: attention, motivation, repetition, reinforcement, feedback, sometimes emotional state, and prior knowledge. They all affect learning outcomes. When we move into the digital age and technology and AI and all those things, these offer new learning methods: interactive media, simultations, simulations, online platforms, all these things. However, distractions challenge the focus and retention. And psychologists like myself study how the brain adapts to this new form of digital learning. What I'd like you to remember is that learning connects behavior through emotion. It helps with human growth, adaptation, and the reason to find meaning. Understanding learning theories actually shows us how people evolve and change, and why sometimes they get stuck in a rut and don't change. So, what happens when we don't change or we have problems with learning? Well, let me give you a perspective through a lens of a psychologist. Sometimes we have cognitive overload. And from a psychological standpoint, one of the most common barriers to learning is cognitive overload. This is when there's too much information presented at once and it's exceeding the brain's working memory capacity. There's a theory that supports the cognitive load that was brought about by Sweller in 1988. The impact of this theory, or the cognitive overload, is that learners retain less information and experience what we call everyday frustrations. For an example, a student studying for a multiple exams one night struggles to remember details from any of the exams. The solution? Chunk the information, use visual aids, space out the learning over time. That usually helps prevent cognitive overload. So, what if we have something like the lack of motivation? Well, that's common. And what that looks like is learning is deeply tied to motivation. So there's a intrinsic, which is an internal drive, and an extrinsic, which is external rewards. And through the lens of a psychologist, you have to look at the three needs that need to be met for an independent person to try to continue to stay motivated. One, autonomy. That's control over one's learning. Competence, which is the feeling of capability of being able to learn something, and relatedness. That's feeling connected to others or the material that's needing to be learned. Some of the problems: when learners feel powerless, anxious, or isolated, motivation declines. So, a solution to this problem is encourage goal setting, provide positive feedback, connect the learner with real life interests. Well, that's all great, Professor Ty, but sometimes I have poor memory retention. Well, you're not alone. Learning depends on the ability to encode, store, and retrieve information. The problem with memory retention is sometimes we're distracted. We don't get enough sleep. And emotional stress disrupts memory consolidation. From a psychological basis, the hippocampal activity, or the memory center of the brain, decreases under chronic stress. So, what's a good solution for this poor memory retention? Well, good rest, spaced repetition, and stress management can improve memory. Oftentimes, my learners come to me saying there are emotional barriers that keep them from returning or retaining information or learning. Well, emotions play a major role in learning, obviously. Fear, anxiety, past failure, things of that nature, they can block concentration as well as recall. According to Yerkes and Dodson Law of 1908, a moderate level of arousal improves performance, but too much anxiety will actually tank it, decrease it, reduce it. Case in point, text anxiety prevents a student from recalling well-learned information. You knew the information, but as you got anxious and started to get a little worked up, you could not prime it or bring it back so you can pull from the encoded information. So, what's a good solution to this? relaxation, mindfulness, a supportive environment in the classroom that promotes decreased anxiety. Sometimes we might even have neurological challenges that affect how we process information, sometimes known as learning disabilities or neurodiversity, dyslexia, ADHD, things of that nature. Well, from the psychological lens, these conditions reflect differences in brain wiring, not a lack of intelligence. Your neural pathways might be going south when they should be going north. Early diagnosis, individualized education plans, IEPs, and adaptive strategies like multisensory learning seems to help these individuals. More common than what some might think is we just lack certain study habits. Maybe our study habits are ineffective. Well, psychologists often note that students misjudge how they learn best. There is no cookie cutter to learning information. Research findings suggest that passive studying, rereading notes, highlighting, recording, is far less effective than active recall and spaced practice. Terms like metacognitive illusion, believing one understands something better than one does, often rears its ugly head. A solution to this: use retrieval practices, self-testing. What we call interleaved learning is very helpful in this particular type of habit. So, environmental and social factors sometimes play a role. A learner's surroundings and relationships have significant psychological influence. For example, noise, chaos at home, lack of social support, peer pressure, parenting styles. The theoretical basis behind this is Bromfenner's ecological systems theory, which emphasized how family, school, and community all shape learning. A stable, safe environment and a positive role model often promotes learning readiness. Sometimes we have fixed versus growth mindset, which came about from Carol Dweck's theory in 2006. This is the one that stated that learners with a fixed mindset believe intelligence is static, while those with growth mindsets see intelligence as improvable through more effort. Fixed mindset learners give up easily and avoid challenges. So, what happens here is we want to reinforce efforts, resilience, and the process of learning, not just the outcome or the results. Sometimes we even have cultural and socioeconomic barriers that play a role in learning. As you recall, learning doesn't occur in a vacuum. Cultural expectations, language barriers, and poverty often affect performance. So, chronic stress from inequality can impact the brain's development and executive functioning. A solution to this: cultural sensitivity in teaching, community-based support, and equality through access of numerous resources can be very helpful. Then we have something called the over-reliance on technology. While digital tools are amazing, they're the way of the future, they're the direction that we're heading. They do enhance learning, but excessive use can reduce attention span and deep comprehension. Some of the latest research says multitasking or finding ways to multitask with technology starts to lower cognitive efficiency. The solution to this: mindful tech use, digital literacy training, and a screen-free study periods. These are all aid in the over-reliance on technology. We're not going to be able to run away from it, but using it in small spurts, little bitty drizzles of information of technology is much more helpful than excessive technology. So, as a psychologist, problems with learning arise from interactions between mind, the environment in which you live in, and whether or not you're motivated to learn the information. Understanding some of these barriers through psychological science allows educators like myself and clinicians and students to design learning environments that are healthy, adaptive, and overall empowering. Let's not just rely on the technology. Let's see how it can enhance our learning. Let's reduce some of the attention span and try to develop a more deep comprehension when it comes to our multitasking with technology. This was another episode of On the Couch with Dr. Ty. And like always, stay safe and stay smart.